Xperts, who's the sponsor of today's panel, and I am thrilled to the moderator of today's panel, and that is Michael Green. He is Director of Sales at NetX, and I'd like to welcome Mike to the forefront. And I will back up, and again, my apologies about some of the technology hiccups here.
Okay.
Here you go, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. Yeah, as Audrey said, my name's Mike Green. I'm the Director of Sales here at NetXperts. NetXperts, we're an IT consulting company. We specialize in cybersecurity, network monitoring, and cloud computing, and we're in our 19th year of business here. I'd like to welcome everybody to our panel discussion. The topic today is Plan, Prepare, and Protect, latest developments in cybersecurity. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panel, or have them introduce themselves. Justin, would you like to start off?
How are you doing? I'm Justin Denham. I am the VP of Information Security Governance at Dollar Bank, local bank here in Pittsburgh. We have branches in Pittsburgh, Ohio, the Pittsburgh area, Ohio, and the Virginia Beach area as well. I'm responsible for our IT risk management program, our security management program, and then also defining the requirements for our security program. And currently, I'm in the office today. I'm in about 2 to 3 days a week, and we try to make sure everybody's in the office 2 days a week. It's really try to split up staff, make sure we're socially distancing, not too many people in one particular department in the office every day, and that's our current work environment. I'm not sure about everybody else. I'll pass along to April from here.
Thanks, Justin.
Hi, everybody. I'm April Doss. So I am the Chair of Cybersecurity and Privacy at the law firm Saul, Ewing, and Lear. And I get to work really closely all the time with folks who provide all kinds of cybersecurity guidance, products, services on the technical side, because of course what I'm helping clients with is the policy and legal side. Our firm has about 16 offices. We're based, among other places, in Pittsburgh. Prior to coming into private practice, I spent over a decade at the National Security Agency, where I was the head of intelligence law. I spent a year down on Capitol Hill as the senior minority counsel for the Russia investigation in the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I have a book coming out in another month called Cyber Privacy: Who Has Your Data and Why You Should Care. So that's me.
Great, thank you, April. Colleen.
Thank you. I'm Colleen McMahon. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Mylan Pharmaceuticals. Mylan is a $20 billion multinational pharmaceutical company, and we operate in about 147 countries, mainly producing and manufacturing generic and off-brand and biosimilar pharmaceutical products. Our U.S. headquarters is actually just outside of Pittsburgh in South Point. And currently, Mylan, in terms of our work environment, I'm working from home today. We are split. We have several thousand frontline workers, obviously, who are working very hard to manufacture the medicines that people need. We also have some office essential workers and personnel, essentially, that are working kind of a hybrid environment. And then there's folks like myself who are working remotely. And like many of you today, we weren't necessarily a work from home culture prior to everything happening with COVID. So I look forward to kind of discussing some of those changes and challenges as we all work through this together.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colleen. Sam. Hello, Sam. Sam seems to be having some technical difficulty there. You able to hear us, Sam?
Yeah, forgive me. Is this working? I can hear you now, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Would you like to introduce yourself?
No delay here, so forgive me. So hello, everyone. My name is, yeah, sure. So my name is Sam Merrell. I'm the head of cyber intelligence for a firm named Covestro. We're a German chemical manufacturing firm. We're international and that we operate in about 28 different countries. Our U.S. headquarters are here in Pittsburgh, though, so you may have noticed our offices as you head out towards the airport on Parkway West. We have the very colorful sign that exists near Giant Eagle, etc. My team, computer security incident response across the entire enterprise. And so, as I said, we're in about 30 countries. We have about 20,000 employees, and we have major manufacturing locations here in the U.S. as well as in Germany, Belgium, China, Thailand, Italy, and a few other countries. So prior to being at Covestro, I worked at the Bayer organization. So Covestro is a spinoff of Bayer. And so I was doing incident response for Bayer for a few years. And before that, I worked at the CERT program at Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. So very happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you all for introducing yourself. Sounds like we've got a very good panel on our hands here. So let's start off with a couple questions here. The first question I'd like to aim at Justin. Justin, with everyone moving to the cloud, what are some important cybersecurity considerations we should all be aware of?
I think everyone needs to understand how they're using their data internally before they start their cloud migration process. There's structured and unstructured data, understanding who has access to databases, the access controls within those databases, how individuals are utilizing that data, and then also what monitoring you can put around those databases and the use to ensure that everyone's doing what's expected based off of their job responsibilities. And I think from a structured data perspective, you should have a good idea on how to manage that. But then you get the unstructured data, right? You want to start a migration to 365 or other cloud solutions. What are you going to put out there? How are you sharing it both internally and externally? And what monitoring and what controls can you put around that unstructured data to ensure it's used appropriately? One of the things I think everybody needs to try to do is identify their data based off of a data classification policy. And then there are automated tools that can be put in place to scan that unstructured data and provide the ability to apply your data classification and restriction rules on how that data is shared both internally and externally. Do you want to share this data externally based off your data classification policy? How many records are in that document? Who should have that access to that document? Is it something that's departmental only? Is it something that one person should have access to? Or is it something that everybody in the company needs access to? And that's really going to help define how you move forward there. And that really will help you prepare for your cloud journey. And what do you want to put in the cloud? How does it abide to regulations and things of that nature?
Good. Great points there. Colleen, how does that affect you at your company?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Justin was saying, I kind of take what he said, and it's really down to 4 concepts when you think about data. So the first is really, as Justin mentioned, the data governance. Who owns the data? Who has rights to the data? Where is it allowed to go? What are you enabling the company here you're allowing to hold that data for you to do with it? Then there's the data sensitivity, and obviously that plays in with the governance as well. Depending on the sensitivity of the data, there are specific things you might want to enforce. But you need to know where your most sensitive data is being stored, how they're going to store that for you. And then it's data access. So again, like you were saying, Justin, where are you going to be able to, and who is allowed to get access to that data? What are they allowed to do with it? What permissions, entitlements, et cetera, do they have for it? And then the one I think often gets overlooked is really the data resilience. So a lot of us have gone to cloud suppliers and are discovering things like lock-in with your data. All of a sudden, you can't move it the way you think you should be able to. You can't access it the way you think you should. And if there is an issue with that supplier, what do you do from a resiliency perspective? How do you recover your data? How do you move to another supplier quickly? So a lot of that goes to sort of how you contract with your cloud supplier, but also ultimately how you define that governance and making sure that you've got the processes in place and the teams that are able to handle and manage the data, even if it is in a cloud environment. You still have that responsibility as an organization.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think something else is to make sure whatever you decide to do long term, you need to put together a training program for your employees to ensure that they understand the requirements from their side. Everybody's responsible for information security. If you're not providing the training to your employees, whether it be through annual training, through any type of phishing test or things of that nature, to ensure that they understand the requirements of your security program and how to protect your data, you're not helping yourself be successful.
Good. April, what are the current global privacy regulations around cybersecurity? If you could expound on that a little.
Sure, it's a great question, and I love that Justin and Colleen started right off with talking about the importance of understanding what your data is, how you're managing it, and where it's held. And I love that this panel that we have is so cross-functional and interdisciplinary, because I think that's really by far the best way, and maybe the only way to really be successful in managing compliance with all of these laws and regulations. So I think about privacy regulations as being those that govern data about people. And then, of course, there's also cybersecurity concerns, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and data that can extend beyond privacy concerns, right? You can have a ransomware attack that doesn't affect private data and that kind of thing. So in terms of the privacy regulation landscape and the cybersecurity regulation landscape, it's grown incredibly more complex over the last 5 years, and it's continuing to become more complex. So, traditionally in the US, data breach laws have focused on things like social security numbers, payment card information, bank account numbers that could be used for identity fraud or identity theft. All those regulations are still in place, and all the obligations to make notification if that data is compromised. In the EU, the transition to the General Data Protection Regulation that took effect in 2018 has really broadly expanded the scope of data rights for individuals and data obligations for entities that collect and process data about individuals, far beyond what was the traditional US model. And since we're all in sort of a global interconnected economy, many companies, even those who think of themselves as being primarily US based, may be subject to the European regulation, which restricts cross-border transfer of data into the US and into other countries that haven't been deemed to have adequate protections under the EU framework. And affords individuals the right to have access to their data, to request deletion of their data, to request correction of their data, and imposes obligations on entities that collect and control and process data to meet, to have in place effective technical and organizational measures to protect that information, to make breach notifications to data regulators. One of the things that's interesting about this is we've seen the GDPR model sort of cross the pond, if you will, because the California Consumer Privacy Act, which took effect earlier this year, incorporates many of those same concepts around data rights for individuals, a very expansive definition of data, personal data under the EU law and personal information under the California law. Again, where traditionally in the US, data breach laws focused on a fairly narrow set of information like financial and health and social security number kind of information. Under GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act, the definition of personal data or personal information that's protected is very wide ranging and really includes anything relating to an identified or identifiable individual in the EU or household or consumer in California. We're continuing to see that trend expand. We just had a really significant court decision out of the EU last month that invalidated one of the major mechanisms that companies previously used to be able to transfer information from the EU to the US. And if you think about it, this includes things like employee data, right? If you're a multinational company, or if you're a US company and you market to people in the US, it's information that's being captured about their visits to your website, right? So lots of changes going on in the cross-border context between the US and EU. And in the California context, where again, we have some very similar concepts around data protection and cybersecurity obligations, there's a bunch of new amendments that have been proposed to the law that are going to be voted on as a ballot referendum in November. So we could see a further tightening of the rules in California. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind for anybody trying to assess what their risk is under all these laws, which data is most sensitive, which is subject to which regulatory regimes, which data regulators might have a say in how the data is handled, is that by and large, these laws don't apply to the location of the business. They apply to the location of the individual that the data is about. So for example, a business that thinks of itself as primarily a Pittsburgh business that maybe has clients, sort of throughout the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, if it has data about people in California, it's going to be subject, it may be subject to the California law if it meets some other thresholds. If it has data about people in the EU, it may be subject to the EU regulations. There are other international laws, certainly, that can apply, but the European Union framework of the GDPR is the one that has really shifted the global landscape in how regulators are approaching this. And just one other note, so far I've been talking about the privacy regulations, but as I mentioned earlier, there are also, of course, cybersecurity risks that don't relate specifically to personal data. And so one of the things that we saw just about 3 years ago, I guess, when the New York Department of Financial Services promulgated Regulation 500, imposing cybersecurity obligations on financial services entities, anybody regulated to do financial services business in the state of New York. That was really an extraordinary move because it imposed a very detailed set of specific cybersecurity obligations. And so what we see across the legal landscape is some laws that set a high-level, flexible standard. Under GDPR, organizations must have technical and organizational measures in place to protect personal data. And other laws, or regulations, like the New York Department of Financial Services, that imposes very specific, detailed obligations. You have to have a cybersecurity program and plan and policy and consider the following elements of it and so forth. So it's a complex landscape. It's changing all the time. And back to the points about data governance and classification and all those things, this is where, my view is that when it's possible to have a cross-functional and interdisciplinary team that brings together the cybersecurity and information security experts within an organization, the business units, the operations units, the risk management function, the financial function, the legal function, the policy and compliance function, however those are dispersed through an organization, we can really bring all those together. That's when you get the really effective kind of comprehensive approach that's so necessary in today's complex environment.
Oh, thank you, April. That was very insightful.
Probably more than you wanted.
No, we appreciate your insight. Sam, let me ask you, how have changing global data privacy regulations impacted managing cybersecurity incidents in cloud environments in your company?
It impacts them quite a lot. And so listening to April talk, it kind of reminds me of some of the struggles we run into on a daily basis. So having incidents that happen in our cloud environments, we have to be particularly sensitive to things like GDPR. So we run into that quite a lot. Very often, what I can only imagine are consequences of GDPR, in that sometimes we find that these regulations actually hinder our ability to respond to incidents. So specifically, we have multiple different providers of cloud services for us, and we find that if those providers happen to be located in Europe, for example, and my team, who's part of them are located in the US, needs to access that data, we'll find that we are hindered by GDPR to do so. And so that's a good example of how these regulations have great intentions, but they can actually impede our ability to do our normal operations or do security work for the company. So we find that these types of challenges, like I said, I hope are unintended consequences of the regulation, because it obviously can't be the goal to hinder a company to protect itself, but we do find these types of challenges. Another great example of how GDPR might have impacted us is our ability to even view data about our own employees who might be in Europe. Being in the US, getting some of that information, even from our own company, has proven to be an obstacle sometimes. In addition, other regulations that we have to deal with on a regular basis, laws, and how those are changing the landscape in which we work on a regular basis. So requirements using equipment that we don't normally have to use, as far as equipment, sometimes those things create a challenge for us to manage, identify, and
thanks, Sam.
respond to incidents.
And Justin, how does that that data privacy regulations impact you in the financial and banking industry?
Well, we have to really take a look at each one and see what our internal use cases are for each regulation, and really map it across our business processes, and make sure the business has the ability to work within the constraint of those compliance requirements. And what we really try to do is, from those privacy requirements, compliance requirements, or even a risk management framework, is map controls across all the frameworks together and understand how we can put internal controls in place to abide with each cybersecurity control and each compliance requirement. And then from there, be able to define business processes that align to each one to ensure we're in compliance with whatever the regulation is. I think that's the approach we try to take to each one, and really making sure you have that bilateral communication with the business so they understand what the requirements are from their perspective, to ensure they're in compliance with the laws, and then also make sure they understand what the potential repercussions are if we're not in compliance. And I think there's always a cost of being compliant and the cost of not being compliant, and you really need to understand both to manage risk long-term effectively.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And Colleen, as Chief Information Security Officer for Mylan, from a cybersecurity perspective, how do you see the regulatory landscape changing?
Sure. I think we're seeing a lot more, and we tend to call it the balkanization of data. I think Sam and Justin both alluded to this concept of every country that you work in wants to keep their data within their country, whether it's through a cybersecurity law or a privacy law. And as Sam mentioned, some of the challenges for that from a monitoring perspective are significant. How do we make sure that we can, cost effectively resource teams that can monitor the data while still abiding by and being compliant with the local laws? In addition, we're seeing things now aimed, even with the executive order in the US most recently, we're seeing things aimed at specific vendors that we've built in or integrated into our ways of working. So WeChat, for example, for us is very critical for how we operate and will operate in China. It's pretty ubiquitous across that environment, and yet we have the US executive order essentially giving guidance on how we should interact with them. And that poses a challenge where we're constantly in this mode of assess the impact, determine the risk, and then figure out what exactly our approach is going to be. And to do that well, you need a lot of things in place. You need to have good asset inventory so you know what those impacts are and are able to identify them. As April and Justin both said, you need to understand the sensitivity of your data and where it is stored so you know what the impacts of the various technologies you're planning to deploy are on that data. And then finally, you have a very good relationship from a governance perspective with your legal, your privacy, your business leads to make sure that you're able to articulate the impact to them and have a consensus as an organization as to where your risk tolerance is and how you're going to manage that risk appropriately.
Great, good point. Okay, I'd like to open this up to everybody. And in light of COVID-19, what impact is IoT having on the work environment? What are some of the new things that need to be considered when thinking about and how to secure information? April, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, you can see I'm working from home, and in the office sometimes, working from home sometimes. And I think initially, sort of in the March timeframe, I think what we saw was a lot of organizations moving very quickly to having a much greater proportion of the workforce working remotely than perhaps had been the case before. So I think initially there were a lot of challenges around getting policies and procedures and training in place and assessing whether people needed additional technology support and those kind of things. Now that we're kind of all collectively past that initial hump, I do find that specifically to your question around IoT, for example, I'm often reminding people of what in the cybersecurity business, maybe we take for granted, but maybe people don't broadly take for granted. Things like don't have sensitive phone calls in the room with your Alexa or other voice-activated assistant, right? Be mindful if you're doing Zoom calls about whether or not the call is going to be recorded. The audio recording for most, Skype, Hangouts, all of the video conferencing platforms that we've all been using so much. Usually the recording function is visibly obvious, but for example, there was an issue with Zoom just a version or two ago, where if you had closed captioning on, it would automatically create a transcript that could be downloaded to the desktop of all participants in the call. That's a very sensitive call. You might not want that to be the case. And in any event, you would certainly want to know from a data management perspective that transcript is being created. Issues around, helping make sure that staff who are working from home know if they are going to record a call, are they in a one-party or an all-party consent state, right? Because some places you cannot legally record a call without the consent of all people on it. So lots of things like that are just part of the ongoing set of policy training and awareness, I think, as people have to think more about how to handle both digital and hard copy information carefully when they are working from home.
Oh,
I think,
thanks, April. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just to add on that, I think it's a whole new world, right? I think from a cybersecurity perspective, a lot of us relied on the basic physical controls that come with an office. We assume that the data is protected because there's security guards and badge access and all of those things have essentially gone out the window. And I think it's caused us to really do what we've always talked about in the cybersecurity space, start thinking more about the information and the data. We can't necessarily rely on all of those other compensating controls, as we call them. So we've got things like, you mentioned smart home environments, Alexas, et cetera, wireless printing, AirPlay, so many PlayStations hooked up to the same network. They're coming in from work. Zoom classrooms that people are handing their work laptop over to their kids to attend. I mean, we've got all of those issues as we go forward, but at the same time, we need to recognize that this isn't a prohibit state either. This is a set of circumstances where we need to figure out how to help people work as effectively as possible, as securely as possible in those environments. And that means things like implementing new tools, a lot more around education and awareness, getting people to recognize, what is sensitive and what isn't. A lot of, in the pharmaceutical space, a lot of people are sharing space with spouses who work for a competitor. As simple as things of saying like, okay, this meeting before you start it, this meeting is highly confidential and we need to treat it as such. So a lot of practices we need to start implementing that, again, we relied very heavily on traditional physical security to help us avoid some of those difficult challenges. So we're all going to be going through this now for the future, and it's going to change the shape of security and put more emphasis on things like zero trust, identity and access management, and information security and information sensitivity. So I think it's a good move because we all wanted to get there. It's a way of kind of accelerating that, but there's a lot of things we didn't anticipate as we've made this challenge.
And I also think a lot of it has to do, what are the use cases for your remote work environment? Are users logging into a Citrix environment where they can use their home machine? If so, what controls are you putting in that environment? Are they using a company laptop? If so, what restrictions do you have based off of what they can connect to your company laptop? What endpoint protection do you have on there? Do you allow them to access their personal email on there? If so, what controls do you have around what they can upload and download to their personal email platforms? And these are the different use cases that you're going to have moving forward. A lot of companies are going to stay in the remote working environment long term, or there's going to be a hybrid. And you really have to understand how your users are going to use their device, whether it be their own device or a company device, to work on a day-to-day basis, or this, hey, I want to be able to use my company laptop to surf the internet, and when I'm not working, that's what I want to do, and you guys just need to be able to let me do that. Okay, well, we're going to let you do that, but there's going to be security controls put in place, and this is what you're expected to do from an acceptable use policy perspective, and making sure that acceptable use policy is stated up front during the HR onboarding process, and you have training associated with that, so everybody understands what the expectation of use for company devices is, and that will help you ensure that your users are on board with your information security program.
Yeah, and Mike, I'll just add that I'm sure folks are aware that since March, FBI, DHS, CISO, and others have all been reporting a significant uptick in all kinds of cyber attacks and phishing attacks that are, sort of disguised as COVID-related information. I think that the malicious actors out there are very much recognizing that having so many people in a work from home environment creates greater opportunity for vulnerabilities to be exploited. So all the more reason to be on guard against that.
Looks like we may have lost Sam. He's off, but we'll see if we can get him back on.
So I see a question in the chat about managing devices from off-prem endpoints. And I'm not going to be vendor specific here, but there are different cloud endpoint solutions in place that allow you to have visibility into what your users are doing when they're not connected to your network. And if you're struggling in that area, you should look to work with one of your security solution providers so you can go through those different options. But there's at least 4 or 5 that coming off the top of my head. I know we have one that we're using today that value add from day one has been significant.
Oh, okay, great. Hey, Rich Simmon in our chat was asking, he said that Justin just hit on this a bit, but with the increase in the work from home, how do you balance a positive user experience while keeping in mind all the mentioned governance and compliance regulations? That's a great question. Thanks, Rich. Panel, what do you think about that? April?
Sorry, I was just starting to type a response to the question on the NDAs.
That's okay. Rich's question.
Yeah, I think it's just to help April out. I think it's just one of those situations where it is about risk-based approach. I know that's kind of cliche, but it ultimately comes the case of where does the user experience come when you weigh the cost and the risk associated with what you're trying to do. So some things like, for example, we're not going to ask everyone to go throw their Alexas out, but telling people to simply put them on Do Not Disturb when they're on meetings gives them that balance. Similarly, there are things that you can encourage culturally, being on video when you're actually having meetings and not just audio, to help improve, again, that user experience. It also helps with security as a byproduct. You get to see who you're talking to or who else is engaged. So I think it's about looking for those opportunities where actually you can bring the two together, that you can get to the point where you're still protecting the information as needed, but you're balancing it with the ability for users to feel still connected in a world that is very different from the one they're used to.
Correct. And just to touch on that a little bit more, there are solutions out there that get really granular in what users are permitted to do when they're off-prem. And when I say granular, you can even say, hey, during the day, my users aren't allowed to go to a website like Netflix, but during non-work hours, they may be able to. And to say when they're on VPN, they can't do it, or when they're connected to the company network, they can't do it. But if it's off working hours and they're not on the company network, they're able to do so. You can get real granular in accessing third-party email sites. Hey, you can download a document from Gmail, but you're not allowed to upload any documents to Gmail. And those are the solutions you have to investigate to promote that positive user experience. And when they're not allowed to do something like upload a document to Gmail, they need to understand why. And you really should have those use cases documented. And that goes back to the user awareness training. Hey, these are the security controls and the security requirements that we have in place. And this is why we have them, and this is how we're going to enforce them.
Just to add, 100% that you all know, right? If restrictions, training, policies, if they're not realistic, if people can't do their jobs, they will work around them. And you don't want that, right? So it has to be made workable. It has to be realistic. If you don't mind, Mike, I'm just going to quickly respond to this question from Simon about how will the EU enforce sanctions against US companies when the company does not have a legal entity. That is a great question, and to be honest, the jury is still out on that. So far, what we have seen from the European data protection regulators is we've seen lots of investigations, fines, regulatory action. Thus far, they have been directed at companies that have some kind of physical presence in the EU. Might be an EU-based company solely, or might be an international, multinational company. We haven't yet seen an EU regulator try to take action against a company that has no EU presence. The first time that happens, it is going to raise really interesting and challenging questions under international law about whether or not the EU has, either as a matter of legal principle, the jurisdiction to do that, or as a practical matter, whether it has the jurisdiction to do that. So for companies that, for example, have no EU presence but are marketing products and services to EU residents, via, sales on a website or something like that, the scope of risk exposure to GDPR from a practical perspective is different than it is for a company that has offices and employees and assets of some kind in the EU. It's a great question, and it's not clearly resolved yet.
Okay, thanks, April. Another question we have here: what are some of the legal requirements that companies must consider related to contract tracing and other COVID-related issues?
So that's a great question too. First, it's helpful to note that sometimes people talk about health-related information in the U.S. and just say, oh, that's HIPAA protected. So first, let me dispel that myth. Lots of health-related information is not governed by HIPAA, which is the federal law that governs protected health information that is held by covered entities, which is specifically defined in the law, and their business associates. So that applies to things like medical providers, hospitals, doctors' offices, insurance companies, and to any kind of vendor that helps support that, whether that's an IT vendor or some other kind of vendor. However, a lot of the contact tracing information, a lot of the health check information that's taking place when people enter into buildings is not going to be covered by HIPAA. It's not going to be protected by HIPAA because it just falls outside the scope of that law. So what starts to come into play then is a combination of potentially some state regulations, the extensive public health exceptions that allow even protected data to be shared, and sort of a realistic balancing for the business entity around how they want to handle this data. So for example, when you're dealing with temperature checks or other kinds of information about employees, that's one kind of legal framework, versus if you want to do temperature checks of everybody who walks into your building lobby, who might just be a visitor and doesn't have an employment relationship. So it gets complicated pretty quickly, and there are a lot of areas of legal uncertainty. I would say from a practical perspective, as folks are looking at symptom monitoring, contact tracing, all of those kinds of things, really important, among other things, to be thinking about how much of the data needs to be retained, how long you need to retain it, and how you're going to protect it. Because if, getting back to Justin's very initial points at the beginning of the call, if you have a really sensible analysis around who really needs to see this information and how are you protecting it, that can create a lot of insulation from legal risk, even in an uncertain legal environment, because you'll be able to say, we have acted defensively, we've been cautious and thoughtful and prudent with this data in this really unprecedented time.
Okay, thanks, April. Colleen, can you expound on the NDAs? There was a question in the chat regarding NDAs. I see that you answered.
So just for others who, and I think April, you expanded on this even better, but NDAs, for those who are on this journey of third-party engagement, starting to see it uplift, NDAs are the beginning. They are not the end of your engagement with your third party when it comes to cybersecurity. I highly encourage you specifically to put in place some type of tiered model around security addendums, depending on the type of information they have. You have different clauses, not the least of which should include, encryption of data, how they're going to report an incident to you, and how long they have to respond to that incident. And then ultimately, things around what you expect them to do as a minimum from a security hygiene perspective. In addition to that, obviously, you want to have an assessment process for those. You don't want to just take what they've said and run with it. You want to make sure you have a view on their security posture, and that's not a one-time thing. So you do that, you know, at contract initiation, but you probably want to do that periodically as part of your assurance program to make sure that what they've said they're doing, they are actually doing, and how they're handling your data is actually how they're doing that. So it is a life cycle management like anything else. You're managing a relationship with that supplier, and you have a lot of obligation to do that in a certain way.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. With that, I'd just like to ask, is there any other questions, comments that the panel would like to make in closing? No comments. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to thank the panelists. You did a great job, very insightful, a lot of good information there. And with that,